Good afternoon. Can everyone hear me all right? Okay, I'm Thomas, your speaker today. Let me tell you a little bit about myself. I've been coding C++ for a living since '88. At the time, we were using Motif on Unix. Anyone done that before? That's very painful. Okay. And then since '97, I worked for a company called Object Space. Anyone heard of that company before? Okay, we were the first company that had an application server called Voyager. And also, for when Java first came out, there was no collection API. At the time, we had something called Java Generic Library. So I worked for that company, and along with 2 other consulting firms. So after working 20 plus years in private sector, last year I decided to join the public sector. And the first surprise I got is I learned that you cannot download stuff to government equipment. That is why today you see I'm using my personal laptop. So $300 laptop I bought 3 years ago from Amazon. So it might be slow during the demo, so please be understandable. This is the third time I spoke at Java 1. Last time I was here, I expect to in 2010. I was talking about comparison CXF and XS2 web service frameworks. So as part of the demo, I'm using CXF as the service layer connecting to my backend business layer. There's no disclaimer here because everything I wrote here has nothing to do with my official job. So just a standalone application. The application is similar, very similar to a very famous income tax calculation software. So you might find some layout might be very similar to that particular software. But everything is done in JavaFX, and I did use the latest packaging option called native packaging 2.2 available not too long ago. So let me point out before I forget. So if you look at the task manager, you will see the name of the processor is the name I gave it. Okay, so it's not a generic Java or Java W. So that's the first thing about the native packaging. I think that's the best solution because you don't have to worry about if you deploy a Java file into the client environment. You need to worry about how many JREs out there, right? You don't have to worry about am I guaranteed to get to my correct JRE. Because in native packaging, everything you need is packaged together. Your application is controlled and without any dependencies on the outside world. And also, you don't have to worry about if I deploy this in a web server or application server. Now, will there be different versions of Java files? No, will there be any class loader problems I bump into? Because again, here is self-contained, totally isolated from the externals. So now, a little bit background about the UI. As I mentioned, I started using C++ and Motif, and that was a long time ago. But ever since I started working in Java, the first app I did is using Swing and design a golf club membership system. And Swing is very powerful, but very tedious to use. And then in the late 90s, I was able to jump on the web applications. And guess what? We have to create HTML stuff on the server side and ship it over. That's also very painful. And then after that, it was Struts, did that. It's okay, a lot better than creating HTML files from scratch, but still, a lot of limiting factors. And then after that, I did JSF. As a matter of fact, I was the one that introduced JSF to one of the consulting firms I worked for. And JSF is a lot easier to use compared to Struts. But now I've been playing with JavaFX. I don't want to go back to any of the previous technologies. And you'll see how easy it is in the application. I'm going to show you the POC. I'm going to show you. So with that, there's no disclaimer. I'm not going to show you any code because you really don't need to see any code because it's so simple. You'll be very amazed. Okay, so first, during this talk, I'm to first of all to talk about why we go with JavaFX business needs, and then briefly talk about the architecture of the POC, and then at the end, I'm going to give you a cookbook, This is what you need to do. Very, very plain and simple. Now, if you want to really do JavaFX as a client, these are the steps you need to do. And one more thing I forgot to mention. I also work for a company that creating applications for handheld devices. I remember at the time, that's in early 2000. At the time, Palm was huge, and Windows CE, BlackBerry, and Symbian. And for the same functionality, we have implemented 4 times. Okay, for Palm, we have to use C. For Windows CE, we have to use Visual C++. For BlackBerry and Symbian, we have to use Java. And every time when they have a new platform, we have to make sure and run everything, making sure that everything is okay. But if you use JavaFX, a lot of stuff are taken care of for you by the Oracle engineers. This is what it's supposed to be. You just worry about your functionality, how you write your application logic, and worry about all the deployment. You don't need to worry about how to deploy to different platforms, different operating systems, different browsers. You don't have to worry about any of those. Just focusing on what you do best, basically writing your user application. So first, let's talk about the business needs. This is a very high-level use case context diagram. A little bit background on this. We were asked to come up with design to replace a legacy system, a legacy Microsoft system. The user space is about 20,000 users. We have about 60% of the users, they have internet access all the time. The other 40%, sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. So we have now 3 different categories of the use cases here. Now the first one is the case management. Now we have to be able to create case, delete case, assign case to different agent to work on. And then we have the case handling. Basically, when the user, doesn't matter if they have internet access or not, they can load the case locally and modify the case locally. And then later on, they can always check in and check out cases. So these are 3 different categories. Obviously, for case control, basically check in and check out cases. And for case management, you have to have an internet access, right? Otherwise, you cannot really talk to the remote server. But for the case handling part, it really doesn't matter. So for those 40% of the users, even when they do not have internet access, do not have network access, they can still work on those cases. So that's the premises. So at the time when I joined, they were thinking about, hey, why don't we create 2 different graphical user interface? The first one is the standalone swing application for the 40% that don't have a network access all the time. And then we have a web application. At the time, they didn't identify what technology to use. Okay, we will use those for those 60% that always have no network access. And then the third thing is, they need to have some kind of database synchronization software to keep the database on those 20,000 plus clients in sync with the server. Today's talk, we're going to address the first 2. I have a different solution for the third one, but we're not going to talk about it today. So I say, okay, that's easy. Done this many times. For the people, for the 60% of the folks that always have network access, no problem. We let them get to hit the URL hosted on the server. They can do anything they want because they always have network access. For the people that sometimes don't have network access, when they do, we allow them to create cases, delete cases, and allow them to check in, check out cases. Okay, perfect. And when they don't have network access, we just gray out those options and then still allow them to work on the cases they have it locally. Perfect, right? Major benefits, no need to create standalone swing client. You don't want to do the same thing twice. There's really no need for that. And we can seamlessly switch whenever it's available by presenting those options. So when those 40% of the users, when they do have network access, we actually allow those options to be selectable by the user. When they don't, then we simply gray it out. Perfect, right? Everybody's happy. And centralized control of the application. Now, server decides when to install the latest JSF applications. Oh, it's fun until when I presented this, I was told that, well, you know what, we have a limitation. We do not allow web server or application server running on the laptop. No, I could have known this earlier, so I don't have to spend all this time creating a POC just to illustrate that. So back to the drawing board. And when I was here 2 years ago, I did learn the JavaFX. At the time, it was a scripting language, 1.3. Although it's a scripting language, I do see the potential of the JavaFX because, again, you don't have to worry about deployment. You don't have to worry about different operating systems. Don't worry about all those. Instead, you focus on what you do best. Basically develop your GUI applications. The basic idea is you write the GUI one time and then deploy JavaFX many times. In addition, if we do that, we can deploy a standalone jar file. We can embed it in a web page as an applet, or we can put in a link so the client can download using WebStart, or the newest one is the native package, and that's the one I'm using. In addition, you don't have to test all your applications on different operating systems or different browsers if you do thin client. And we know what's coming next is we're going to get requests saying that, hey, can you support this in iPad? Now, if you don't do this in JavaFX, yes, you can probably do it, but it probably won't be as easy or straightforward as JavaFX. Here are some of the features. The first thing I think is the most important thing is the using of FXML. Idea is very simple. You separate out two different tests. For the people who are very good at designing user interfaces, you allow them to use something like Scene Builder. They can visually lay out different widgets, and then they can use CSS style sheet and then basically modify the screen to conform to corporate standard or whatever. And you don't have to touch it as a developer like myself. I'm not good at those. By the way, the example I use is based on the login example in the JavaFX sample example. So the CSS, I borrowed it, so I cannot create something like that. That looks stupid. So by having a different group of users designing your interfaces, developers can be free only working about how to make this work, right? You provide methods and you hook it up and then everything should work. And if you want to talk to the backend, you call the backend web services, and that's it. That's your focus, separation of concern. That's made possible by having this FXML. And another thing is, if you change the layout, if you change the coloring scheme, you do not need to recompile a file because again, it's a standalone file. It's not a Java file. It's XML. A wide variety of UI controls. You have something very cool. I remember when JSF first came out, there's nothing like a tree browser. I think at the company, I don't remember what the name. They came out with that later on, but you start with a rich set of UI controls to begin with. And the one on the left, this is called accordion, basically a sliding window. You click on one, and it will show the content of the one you clicked. And there's also a web component. By the way, in JavaFX, everything is part of the scene graph, and it can be a node, it can be a group of nodes, and one special component is called Web View. It's associated with an embedded web engine. You can use that to basically load the web page, and using the JavaScript to communicating with the hosting web page. And it has a rich HTML5 support. You get the HTML editor to begin with. You don't have to worry about how to create one. It's right there. You can edit the content. You can view the history. And in addition, they have you can basically display a fancy clock like that in SVG. You don't have to write it. And if you have SVG code like that, I think it's about 30, 40 lines. And you just use it, just hook it in. So now let's talk about the architecture of the POC. This is the very standard enterprise architecture. At the top, you have the user interact with the presentation layer. In this case, I'm using FX to do the presentation layer. And also, there's another layer called service layer. Here, I use CXF to basically provide communication mechanism between presentation layer and business layer. In business layer, I just have some very simple business objects interacting, calculating income tax. The idea is very simple. I just have different income brackets. For different income brackets, I have a tax rate. So that's very simple. It can get very fancy, but that serves the purpose. And then persistent layer, right now, I just using in-memory database. So if you shut down Tomcat server, everything is gone. But eventually, I hope I can get a chance to do JPA to try out some neat products. I have something coming up talking about it. And then JPA, obviously, you can persist data to the database, or you can rely on external services, service as a layer, storage as a service. You can use that too. And then horizontally, you can have cross-platform security, other kind of stuff. So this is from my 2010 presentation. Service layer, I'm using CXF. The basic idea is very, very simple. On the client side, you have a proxy. So the proxy is responsible to convert all your Java objects, into some kind of XML and stick it into a soap envelope, ship it over the network. And then on the server side, there will be some server component responsible to convert the XML back to objects, so that the server can use those objects and then do any kind of computation that's necessary to come up with a resulting graph of objects, again, converting back to XML, ship it over the network, and the client proxy will convert it back to the objects. So the basic idea is very, very simple. But actually, what it does is it frees you from, you don't have to know what server is running on, what OS is running on. It could be on Windows, it could be on Linux, it could be on anything. And on the client side, the top one is Java, and the middle one is Ruby, and the bottom one, that was the icon that was used for JavaFX script 1.3. The point is, it's totally platform independent, language independent. Because again, on the client side, you just depends on what the Windows is saying. Use any kind of a proxy mechanism to generate the client objects. You just deal with it. One mechanism to do the marshalling and marshalling is called XMLBeans. This is a very, very simple idea. If you have a well-established schema, the company I worked for before joined the public sector is the pharmaceutical company. They basically provide software to run pharmacies like Safeway, Everson's, all those kind of chains. So they have in that pharmacy industry, they have a well-established schema. And what you do is, instead of creating your own types or your own XML or your own schema, you just compile that well-established schema, that's the industry standard, into a Java. So all the types you need is already defined. And then from that schema, you can generate XML requests. You'll be converted into Java using you'll be instances of those types generated in the Java, and then requests will be doing the one way from XML Java objects to XML, and then response will be reversed. I think I did the redaction incorrect. So that's the service layer, very, very simple. And using CXF, how many of you have used CXF before? Okay, it's so easy. Okay, I started using web service about 5 years ago. At the point it was Access and then Access 2. And then once I bumped into CXF, I don't want to go back. Okay, okay, so here is some of the objects for the domain. Since we are trying to simulate income tax calculation program, so we have the taxpayer, a special kind of person, and then we have dependents. A taxpayer can have different attributes for the return information. You can have file singly, file jointly, all the kind of stuff. And then the dependent will have relationship with the taxpayer, and also indication if that dependent is living in the same address as the taxpayer. And I have a bunch of W-2s to capture the wages for that particular taxpayer. And also the taxpayer might have a side business, loyalty. They might have purchased some stocks that pay out royalties. That's what the list of Schedules K is for. And then in addition, most of the time, the taxpayer can decide if you want to use standard deduction or using itemized deductions. If you use itemized deduction, then you use Schedule A. And also, the taxpayer might have some income, investment income that's captured by 1099B, and also other kind of income, for example, like 1099 interest. You might have an interest from a checking account or a savings account. Or dividend, if you invest stock or mutual funds, you get dividends. And also, you might have a side business, so you might have a collection of Schedule C. And then the last one, for the Schedule C, you pretty much have a list of assets. Most businesses will have a list of assets you acquire, and then you sell those assets, and you can depreciate your assets. You have a list of expenses. All of this just to make sure that, hey, I'm not just doing some hello world kind of stuff. So I bump into problems because altogether I have about 45 domain objects. So on the server side, it's relatively easy. For the entry point is a facade, basically provide a list of methods. The first one is the only one I implemented. It's basically calculating income tax. And then I have this tax engine, and I have two different implementations. One is for 1040 and one is for 1040 EZ. These are the only two I implemented. The tax rate on the lower left is the one I just described earlier. I have different income brackets. For every bracket, I have a different tax rate. So use that to calculate it. And the tax engine factory will basically take in a graph rooted on the tax form. And then depends on the type of the form, you basically return a different tax engine to calculate the tax. So this is a very simple return computation. Once you get the return, you're figuring out what tax engine to use, and then basically for that tax engine, you iterate through all the incomes, including 1099s, W-2s, royalties, Schedule Cs. Add them all up, and then deduct the number of dependents, deduct if it is a standard deduction, if it is automatic deduction, and after that just return the tax. Very simple. The persistent layer is that's what I plan to do next. The basic idea behind persistent layer is there's a mismatch between database tables and Java objects because they are not one-to-one mapping. So obviously it depends on what you do and what kind of database you use, you'll get different performance. And here I'm just throwing this up. This is I have all these references in the back in the reference. So it's kind of interesting. On the left, you have a whole bunch of database products running in embedded mode. On the right, you have the same set of databases running in the standard client-server mode. As you can see, the ones on Excel ObjectDB, its performance is really not good. And the ObjectDB is very good because they are not using relational database. They just use flat files, use proprietary mapping mechanism. So without having to deal with database tables, you'll see the improvement is huge, like 10 times. Next, let's talk about the client. So this is what the POC looks like. At the top, I show the basic information about the taxpayer. And where I have a tab panel down there, the first tab is a dependent, which you can add different dependents. And then income allow you to enter all the 1099 information. And deduction allow you to pick standard deduction or itemized deductions. And business allow you to enter Schedule C if you have a side business. And also graph will show you the income bracket, what were the percentage of, for example, the W-2s, and every different place will have different size of pie. And also I show the comparison for current tax year with last 2 years. So just to show you how easy it is to use in JavaFX. So it's really, really simple. I didn't realize it's so simple. So the first, you define model or domain objects. And in my case, I just use a proxy generator. I gave the address of the WSDL, Web Service Definition Language. It generates all those domain objects for me. I don't have to create any. The second one, design user GUI screens using the scene builder. Drag and drop different widgets on the canvas, and then making sure that they look good. And then the third one, create control object is inside IDE. Here I have to create view objects correspond to the widgets already laid out in step number 2. And once I have that, I also create the method stubs for event handling. The reason is because in step number 4, we need to go back to the scene builder to do the wiring. So for every component in the Java class, you have to wire it up, connect it to the UI widget you laid out in step number 2. And also for example, if there's a button, you have to specify what method you want to call. Okay, so that's what I refer to as wiring. And then once you've done that, you go back to number 5, implement the stubs, making sure the view objects and the model objects are in sync. You pull out the values from the view objects to populate model objects. If you change the model objects in the back, behind the scene, you want to repopulate the view objects. Those are done automatically once you've done the wiring. Or in the second case, you want to invoke web services. That's very, very simple. And then once you've done that, you test it in the IDE, and then you test the deployment. And again, I cannot emphasize the importance of the native packaging, because if you use that option, pretty much what you test is guaranteed to deploy. Because again, you live in an isolated, controlled environment. You are not going to be influenced by external factors. Okay, you don't have to worry about what JRE is the client, the target platform is using. You don't have to worry about the browser if the browser has the correct plugin. You don't, because again, everything you need is right there.
For step number 6,
okay.
Testing, did you do mostly unit testing or integration testing or both?
Unit testing to begin with, yeah.
JUnit?
Yeah.
Any difficulties with JavaFX?
JavaFX is just Java, Again, before JavaFX 2, it was a scripting language, which is different, but it's just Java. Yeah. You're welcome. So first, define model objects. Okay. By the way, we have to use Eclipse, so not by choice. That's the official IDE we have to use. So using Eclipse, there's this web service client proxy generation. In there, you pick what configuration you want to use. Here, I just pick CXF. You give it where the location of the CXF installation, and then you give it the URL of the web service definition language, and then boom, it generates all the model objects for you. So here is just a partial list of all the model objects. I didn't touch any of those except one. I did add the toString method for the asset. The reason is because in the business tab, I have to allow the user to pick an existing asset. So to do that, I have to provide meaningful output. So that's why I override the toString method. If the domain object is very, very complicated, alternatively, what I can do is I can create a summary object, okay, and then just put the summary object in the list. So you will display the summary information. And design GUI screens, and again, it's trivial. I've been using many visual editors. By far, this is the best, okay, in my opinion. Drag and drop, you move it around, and then there's a preview button. So without writing any code, you can see what your screen looks like. Okay, so very, very simple. Create control objects. First, create view objects. For everything you have on the canvas, you have to specify here by using the @fxml annotation. The reason is because once you have done that, when you go back to the scene builder, you can select from a drop-down list to pick which component to match with which UI widget. And then for the event handling, at the beginning, for example, in the paradigm I'm using is for everything that has more than one, I just have a table. And then I have different fields to allow entering different values for that particular model. And also I have an add and I have a delete. So once they enter all the values in all the fields required, they press add, the value will be insert into the table. If they select any entry in the table and then hit the delete, and then you get rid of that. So for me to do that, I have to create the method stub to begin with. So on the next step, I can perform the wiring, telling the runtime, hey, if the user click on this button, I want you to invoke this method. So for example, the first method will be invoked when the user enter all the information for W2 and then click the add button. So it will invoke this add W2 method. And if the user select an entry in the W2 table and then click the delete, then delete W2 will get invoked. As you can see, the paradigm is very, very simple. But I mean, it's just no-brainer. You just have a stub here. Now, for the wiring part, there's a limitation for the FX. Every screen, you can only have one controller. Basically, the place you have to declare all the view components. So in this case, although I have 5 different tabs, and there are different components on those 5 different tabs, I have to declare all those view objects in the same class. So in this case, the first tab on the top is you first have to pick the controller. In this case, I pick the main controller, and then once you pick the controller, you will populate the drop down to allow you to pick what components. Those are the components that have the add fxml annotation. So they will be populated in this drop down box. You can only pick from whatever is there. You pick that, and then you can do other fancy stuff. And another thing is style sheet. You can pick, if you have multiple CSS style sheets, you can pick one and then associate, for example, in this case, a table, the style sheet for the table to particular table, style sheet for the button to particular button. You can all do that in here. So there's no coding required. Everything is done here. You're free. You don't have to deal with that. I don't like to deal with that. So for the button, in this case, I click the add button for the dependent table. So in this case, first of all, I pick the button, associate that with the fxml view object I have in my controller. And then once I do that, then it will allow me to pick what method I'm going to use. In this case, I just pick the add dependent. And after that, I'm done wiring. Okay, I not only wire the GUI widgets with my view objects, I also wire the event handling to my method in the class. So that wiring part is done. And once you have done that, you have to go back to implement those stubs. So here is a very, very simple. So for add dependent, I need the first name, last name, social security number, living in the same address, and date of birth, and relationship. Relationship is enum, and I map it so that it can be a drop-down list to pick. And then delete dependent is very simple. I just delegate it to something called dependent controller. I don't like to have big files, big classes. So what I do is for every tab, I have a separate controller to deal with the add and remove portion of the UI. So I have a main controller which has all the view objects. I have the all event handling methods. For event handling methods for different tabs, I delegate it to different controllers, one for every tab. And for web services, it's also very simple. You get a proxy, and from that you invoke the method, and then after that you do whatever you want. In this case, I just simply display the calculated income tax in a dialog box, and then the user can say OK, and then just the dialog box just goes away. OK, any questions so far? Cool. Let's look at the demo. I just have a Tomcat running here. So anytime when anybody call the web service I have, it will print out the object graph in the toStream method. So it will show what's been populated. So first of all, okay. So let's say we have John Doe. Everything else is not important. Let's say income. Let's say he made $30,000, and employer working for American Airlines. I don't have any verifications, but you got the idea. Oops, I think I need to. Okay. Okay, So now I only have one entry. If I look at the graph, okay, it will show that all my income is W2. Okay, and you won't believe how easy it is just to display this graph. I just have some data populating in some format and then just give it to FX UI control and I'm done. And here's a bar graph just comparing the last 2 years. They are canned data and then comparing the current with the last year. So once I have that, I have an income, I can just calculate my income tax. Okay, so this tells me that I owe about $3,000 income tax. As you can see on the Tomcat, I basically print out the object graph using the toString methods on all those domain objects. Very simple, nothing fancy. So now if I go back and say, okay, guess what? I also made a great deal on Google. So sorry, I forgot my reading glasses. That's why sometimes I cannot tell what is what. Let's just try something and see what happens. Okay, so now if I go back to graph, you'll see now everything is done. Everything is updated very, very simple because again, here we're dealing with events, right? Every time when I change a tab, I calculate everything. So everything is up to date. And then if I calculate the text again, it'll be different. So now I owe a little bit more. So you got the idea. So I cannot emphasize how easy it is to have all this. And for the business, I can do additional stuff, but I mean, so for example, I have paid $300 for this thing. So once I've done that, I can say I want to. I sold the same violin. I sold it for $500. And here I can only pick whatever assets I have. So by having wired in the model I have in the asset, and then you will populate the drop down, so I can pick this. Okay, and let's add. So once I've done that, the graph will change again. So just give you a simple reference. I finished the UI portion in about 2 weeks for this. In comparison, when I did the JSF, at least double, maybe triple the time. In JSF, I have 15 different screens, and the faces config XML is a mess. Although I'm using a tool that allows me to drag and drop different pages and then wiring that way, still, it's not trivial. So I would say, again, another thing is there's literally no learning curve if you use FX, because it's Java. I mean, if you are a Java programmer to begin with, you know how to use FX already. The only difference is, hey, you can offload a lot of work. You don't have to worry about screen designs. Now, to people that are really good at this, and then you provide them a list of components so they can wire things from the UI widget into the view objects, and you tell them if you want to invoke the method, they can wire that too. If they don't want to do that, you can wire yourself. But other than that, it's straightforward. So lastly, what's next? The third thing I learned in the government is just because something is good, there are lots of merits, there are lots of advantages, doesn't mean you can use it. So I'm going to submit this and hope that it will get approved so we can use it. And also I'm hoping that I can get some time to work on the persistent layer. Obviously, on the client side, instead of using something standalone, we can use something like JavaDB that's embedded. It's in the JDK. And then for the server, again, this is a big reach. I'm going to see if we can do a POC on ObjectDB because it's so fast. And also business layer, maybe using something called Druth. Instead of have all the income calculation logic in the code, maybe we can have some business rules defining those stuff. Just as an illustration. Sometimes you can give some ideas, but sometimes you have to create a POC like this so that they see, oh, okay, this is not smoke and mirror. This is actually something that's working. And so other than that, here's the list of references. You can click on those. That will lead you to different websites and different articles, except some of the ones that number 2 is a book. Number 4 is the presentation I gave in 2010. And okay, this is all I have today. Any questions? Yes?
How did you handle validations, or do you?
It's just, how do you handle validation in Java?
Well, I mean, there's open source methods, so you can intercept the keystrokes. Like, you want to make sure they type in a social security number, that sort of thing.
Okay. Remember I mentioned the wiring? Now, once they type it in, you have the backend method in there. In that method, you can validate it.
So you kind of hardwire validation?
Yeah, because again, everything is on the client side. We're not sending anything back to the server yet. Again, this is a very simple POC. If it is, if you are going to make it a production, I would say at least three times more effort just to make everything doing the right way.
I attended one of the JavaFX sessions, and they're like, we're going to have a meeting on Friday about it to see if they can introduce us. I was wondering if you had any kind of workaround in the meanwhile that you did.
Not right now. Not that I'm aware of. So, yeah. Any other question? Yes.
I had a question about, you said you created a different controller for each app.
Yeah.
So when you say different controller, you're just talking about a different Java class?
Yeah, different Java class.
Okay, so it's not like a different controller that's defined in the XML?
No, because like I said, because here I only have one page, right? So for one screen, you can have one controller. Basically, that's the place you're going to define all the view objects. So different controllers, I have 5 different controllers, one basically controlling the functionality of those different tabs. Yeah.
So the XML just still has one?
Correct.
File.
Correct. So if you have multiple screens, obviously you have multiple controllers. But for the same screen, doesn't matter how complicated your view widgets are, you can only have one controller. Yeah. Another question? Thank you for coming.